you. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Hunter Healy. I'm a student at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm a senior and my major is cybersecurity. So the title of my presentation is on hacking Alexa, emerging penetration testing methodologies. So this summer I worked as a penetration tester, cybersecurity analyst at Visa, the credit card company. And for my project that I worked on, I did like a research project on how our methods of penetration testing are evolving over time, specifically with respect to the evolution of Internet of Things. And as we have these new endpoints and technology connections, how do we test for those and secure our systems without sacrificing innovation or while sacrificing innovation, but with respect to the risk we're posing to ourselves. So I modeled the dolphin attack, which this video will explain to you. But basically, the Amazon Alexa speakers can talk to each other through inaudible voice commands used with ultra-frequent sounds. So I flew out to Visa's headquarters, and I toured their innovation center, and they were doing a demonstration using the Alexa speakers, and they said, "Hey Alexa, buy a Ferrari with Visa Checkout," which is their new Alexa-enabled skill that allows you to use your voice to buy things with your bank account lined up using Visa Checkout. And everyone was on their feet clapping, and I just didn't really get the sense that security was at the heart of what they were doing, though we like to talk about a lot how secure our systems are. So I came back and I did some research, and I found the dolphin attack and actually bought everything you need to do it and modeled it for everyone. But this video will kind of demonstrate it to you, and I think it's really interesting as we move toward these awesome capabilities and we advance, especially in the private sector, to gain market share. How do we protect our assets at the same time? So as you saw in that video, it's basically the use of inaudible voice commands that only the devices hear from each other. So if this is done in a public space, much like going to a coffee shop and not connecting through a VPN, a lot of sensitive data can be posed or can be put at risk. So yeah, that was kind of the dolphin attack. There we go. So this is kind of a threat model to kind of show the attack. and how it works. And so basically what I chose to do was kind of create a penetration testing framework within our penetration testing reporting tool to kind of account for scenarios like this, where it doesn't look like the standard web application where, you know, it's kind of like filling out paperwork. It's not as exciting as, you know, a 0 day. It's, you know, sitting there and saying, did you check for SQL injection? Did you check for cross-site scripting and stuff like that, and all of the OWASP top 10? Whereas, you know, now with all this innovation, we have to take a much more proactive model to accounting for things that you may not even know of. So the Alexa skills, like these are just a few of the companies that have Alexa-based skills. I talked about my company, Visa, also PayPal, Capital One, US Bank, Farmers Insurance. So, you know, I'm not really sure how much value that gives to the customer to being able to check an insurance policy or transfer money via their voice. You know, we don't really know how much value that places to consumers yet because it's kind of new and you don't see a lot of companies doing that. So I'm not sure how essential that is to market share, and it'll be interesting to see as we become more IoT enabled and reliant on voice. But it poses, at this point in time, it's my opinion that it poses a greater risk to security than value it gives to consumers. So yeah, I think there are other forms of other companies where it would make more sense, such as like an e-commerce site where you might want, like Amazon, where you might want to order more paper towels, but to have your bank account information read out to you, you know, just you don't know who's listening around you and stuff like that. So that was kind of like my analysis of the Alexa skill. But then moving on to penetration testing methodologies, when we look at Internet of Things specifically, our security models and how we test for things are going to need to evolve. And so the 5 kind of elements that we're going to be looking at when we account for IoT and not just your standard like OWASP pen testing and red team work, we need to look at networks, and I'm not going to read all that jargon, but you can see those are the kind of things that we're looking at when we're testing our networks, the applications themselves, as well as firmware, encryption, and hardware. So my contribution this summer was to take our current pen test reporting tool and all of that like forms that we fill out and create one that accounts for all of these things, which we don't really look at on the day-to-day. And then from a business technology standpoint, we have to look when we're innovating and we're like praising all of these new things that our innovation centers, we need to look at the exposure that companies are putting themselves at risk of. So I think it's really important to follow the zero trust model for identity and access management, and likewise the privacy and security risk model for new things that we don't really, it's kind of the unknown. We don't know what risks they're going to pose. When I showed my managers that dolphin attack, they had no idea. And so when we bring on these new technologies, it's kind of not what we can test for, but what we can't or we don't know of yet. But my recommendation, as with probably any other security professional, is just to follow the risk model and look at what risk we're putting ourselves at. And then just to close, it's just the balance of innovation versus security, and I don't think they always have to be at odds. I think when we integrate them together and look at the risk that's being posed, we can make decisions that benefit not only the security and longevity of the organization or the company, but also the capabilities of the consumer and increase their interactions and enjoyment of the product. So yeah, that was my presentation.
Thank you for coming today. My presentation is going to be on exploring the future of AI practices and policies. So we all know AI is becoming a rampant part of our society. It's being integrated into almost all our technologies today. And with that being said, there are a lot of policies that should be made that are not being made to protect us as citizens and to also protect the world in general from any potential like misuse or unethical uses of AI in our society. So right now there are little to no AI policies. There are almost no laws governing the development of AI industries or the military. So in the military, AI is being used to create. They're using it to advance their machines, their weapons, to create sentient robots. There's not much development in there, but they're doing it. Right now, we have some robots that are being piloted by individuals remotely, and that they use AI to do that. So when you have a drone that's being piloted remotely by an individual, there's a kind of a disconnect between the person who's piloting the drone and the action of actually killing people with that drone. So since you're not actually doing it up front, there's a ethical problem there. So there's no empathy relating to the action of killing somebody, since you're not actually taking part in killing someone. You're just remotely away while you're piloting a remote device, and you're using that for an airstrike. Some believe it's far too early to begin to regulate AI, and that any regulations are at this infancy stage of technology is just stumping its growth, which I disagree with. People believe that if you start to regulate AI right now, you're going to impede its progress, and we wouldn't be able to maximize its benefits. And according to Miles Bundage and Joanna Bryson, there exists some de facto AI policies which could be further subdivided into indirect, direct, and AI-relevant policies, which I'll speak on a little bit. So direct AI policies, those are policies that are specifically oriented towards governing AI-based technologies and are such as driverless car regulations. So we all know about self-piloted cars, self-driving cars. We know about the ethical problems, considerations when having to make a choice between the life of the user and the life of pedestrians. Indirect AI policies, those indirectly affect AI-based technology development, but are normally focused on other technologies or technology in general, such as intellectual property laws. Don't know what happened there. And AI-relevant policy, AI development is neither specifically targeted nor significantly affected, but with the knowledge of possible AI futures would benefit policymakers such as education, urban planning, and welfare policies. So with all these are just de facto policies that the other two I mentioned they came up with. These are not like ingrained into by law by the government. They're not made by the government. These are just policies that people have come up with when researching AI policies. So some issues of AI policies. We don't know who gets to decide what to create and how to create it. There's no governing over these practices. Anybody can create whatever they want. They can do whatever they want with AI, and that can have potential risks to us as individuals. Who makes sure AI technology is safe? So right now, you have your Siri, your Alexa, your Google Home, all those devices, it's going unchecked. We don't know exactly how they're developed. We don't know everything that's going into it. We don't know exactly how safe they are. Hunter's previous, her presentation, there's those attacks that you could have when you're using certain ultrasound, I've forgotten that word, frequencies to use it to hack Alexa or Google. There are things like that we don't know, backdoors that these policies need to be put in place so we can prevent things like this from happening. And how is the liability allocated across complex software/hardware chains of development when a user is harmed or a system is abused? So assuming there is an attack using AI and AI is exploited either by an individual or by the developers themselves, who's liable for those damages or any harm that's caused by those AI attacks? We don't have any policies to help with that. Now, what would be done when end users or designers abuse AI systems? The same thing. We don't have anything that's affecting that? And would it be ethical for AI robots to take care of the elderly or teach children? So currently there are some robots that are being made that are in progress of teaching children. They want them to take over teaching and also to take care of the elderly because I guess we just don't want to take care of the elderly anymore, which is kind of sad. But so what would make this ethical? Like, would people actually stand up for this? Would people like agree that we should leave the care of the elderly or our children in the hands of robots? Robots who don't have any empathy or who cannot relate with humans on a certain level, like would that be ethical or not? That's a question that comes up every once in a while. And what would be done to prevent the development of fully autonomous weapons? So in a very far future, we may see weapons that pretty much are robots who are just sentient, just like humans. And these weapons could be used to start wars, to fight nations, you know. What would stop people from developing these weapons? There's nothing currently stopping anybody who would, if anyone was could make an advanced enough AI to create something like this. There's nothing stopping anybody right now, and there's no regulations on how the military would be able to use this or how it would be used overseas. So that's a really touchy topic.
What research or knowledge do you have that there's no regulations in effect that says should the military have such a weapon available tomorrow that it could or could not use it then?
Well, I do know that there's like general regulations about using weapons in general, but there's nothing stopping them from developing it. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like not using it, but like the development of it. There's nothing really hindering them from just making it out of the blue. Like if they had the they had the technology to create it, there's nothing stopping them from doing that or stopping them from anybody from doing that.
So, hello, my name is Taylor Wilson. I'm a student at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Today, I'm honored to speak at this event in Washington, D.C. on the 77th anniversary of Pearl Harbor Day, an event long infamous for being the catalyst which drew the U.S. into the Second World War. Today, I will discuss another war being waged as we speak, a war not of military might, a war not being fought over resources or imperialistic expansion, but a war for the individual soul of man, a war which could have far greater impact than that great tragedy of the 20th century. I will only look at the smallest fraction of this struggle, forcibly constrained to the topic of AI and AI and misinformation. Before we can delve deeper into the subject, we must first understand the language involved. By misinformation, I mean the willful, intentional, and knowing act of disseminating lies beyond the need to cover one's own shortcomings. Here's one of the statistics on AI and automated dissemination of misinformation. This research is from First Monday, a peer-reviewed scientific journal run by the University of Illinois at Chicago. When looking at the 2016 presidential elections, I'm using this because it's the most thoroughly researched area on the subject. They took the top 50,000 Twitter accounts ranked by volume output, tweets, and found that they accounted for approximately 60% of all activity on Twitter. They then used a program called Botternaut, which found that at least 14.36% of the top 50,000 accounts were run automatically by bots. They found that 3.8 million tweets were sent by bots regarding the 2016 elections. That means a little over one in every 10 tweets made involving the presidential elections were made by bots. Rapid advancement in technology has made this all the more accessible and cheaper, while also becoming ever more potent. What one person could do as recent as 10 years ago is now dwarfed by the power of AI. What used to be the ability of only the most dedicated governmental agencies is now something which is readily available to an ever larger populace. Now, a single man living on his own, or in his mother's basement, can unleash an army of thoughtless machines to leave his adversary in ruination. Whether it be a restaurant owned by his ex, a politician he does not share views with, a news organization which he does not like, or any individual or organization, he can unleash an army to subvert it, letting it buckle under its own weight. This is not to say that world governments do not use the same tools or the same tactics as that singular man, as some certainly have and do. And some governments have cybersecurity divisions unparalleled in the execution of subversive tactics, which leave US cybersecurity divisions looking like doddering children. But now it is even more difficult to see through the fog of misinformation which plagues us on a daily basis. Now I must also define subversion. Subversion in this case means to undermine a power structure or system via misinformation, propaganda, confusion, and/or casting doubts on the core beliefs of the system or structure. Subversion only works on those individuals or groups who are responsive to the subverter, either by incompetence or inaction, to turn a blind eye to the monster which lurks behind you. You must have the subverter, in whatever form it may take, and the subverted. If you ever get the time, there's a great video on subversion on YouTube by a man named Yuri Bezmenov. It's very interesting. I suggest you go watch it. AI, with a tool with the potential to rival the atomic bomb, is readily available to almost all citizens in Western countries. Should it be? Perhaps, perhaps not. Using spam bots, is it illegal? No. No, it is not. And why is it not illegal? Should it be? This is one way in which a country is willingly subverted. Its laws allow it. I will paraphrase a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Everyone is entitled to know everything, even lies. But this is a false slogan, characteristic of a false era. People also have the right not to know, and it is a much more valuable one. The right not to have their divine souls stuffed with nonsense, gossip, and vain talk. Let us look at modern-day Russia. Russia, in its current state, cannot be subverted by advanced AI, or any other form of subversion. It has strict control over its borders. The media is censored by the government. The population is kept in check by governmental agencies and extrajudicial actions on behalf of the government, and it is working. Let us not forget that President Putin was an agent of the KGB. I hope no one suspects me of offering my personal praise of this system, as it comes at an ever-increasing incursion cost in order to control the society and culture. This, however, will ultimately fail. Russian views, or at least the views of the Russian government, are coming under more and more scrutiny in the West. Russia must continually constrict possible avenues of subversion, but in doing so, it ties its own noose ever tighter. It is not illegal to lie as a representative of a news agency. Now we are seeing an unprecedented number of new news outlets being created at an ever-growing pace. The amount of news outlets is growing at an exponential rate. We cannot even tell the exact number of news outlets in the US, let alone worldwide, because the exchange of information is in such a state of flux. How many news outlets do we count YouTube as? One, or the multitude of channels which report on such a plethora of things that one would find it impossible to calculate? Do you not think it possible that some of these news agencies are hubs for misinformation? Who elected them to be disseminators of news? Who gave them the qualifications? Would it not be conceivable that a small news agency could use AI to misinform the public for its own gain? What about this man? Perhaps you've heard of him. He's a weatherman who was down in North Carolina. He pretended the storm he was reporting on was more severe than it actually was. You can see two people easily walking past as he pretends to brace himself. This is not a big lie, but a representation of the larger systemic problem. What about this shot? These are two anarchists down in Mexico. It looks pretty serious, right? Now what do you think? Do you notice that there are many more people recording this event than are taking part in it? When asking, who is doing this? The answer is too long, complex, and convoluted to put in any precise terms. However, one may be able to generalize the situation as follows. At the lowest level, you would find those individuals who misinform others for personal satisfaction or gain. At a higher level, we may find those groups or organizations who misinform for political or economic gain. At a higher level, we may find those groups or organizations who misinform for political or economic gain. Yes, knowing the exact consequences of their actions. When one asks why this has seemingly come about in the last few years, one will find several answers. The reason as to why we are seeing more of it is because of the ever-accelerating technological advances, making it easier to communicate at an ever larger and faster growing rate. Here you can see some of the statistics for the computer price index and the evolution of technological adoption and usage, both of which suggest that technology is becoming more readily available to an ever larger group. How does one see through the fog? There's an old joke on the internet. If you ask the internet what color the sky is, you will get 5 answers. If one is to seek truth in the world, such as it is, one must be cautiously judicious in his excavation of the truth. He must be ever watchful of traps and footfalls set before him to lead him down a false path. I could not put it better than when Alexander Solzhenitsyn himself said, "Truth eludes us if we do not concentrate our attention totally on its pursuit. But even while it eludes us, the illusion of knowing it still lingers and leads to many misunderstandings." If we truly wish to see our way through this modern world, we must be ever watchful, as much of ourselves as of others. Thank you.
In this presentation today, we will define what one-way functions are, explore the 2 types of one-way functions, discuss the applications of one-way functions, and their relation to the million-dollar question of P versus NP and whether or not they're the same kind of problem. All right, so to begin, I'd like to give everyone a kind of history leading up to providing some context regarding one-way functions. Now, in 1874, Georg Cantor, who's a German mathematician, came out with a set of concepts on set theory and derived all mathematical theorems from a set of axiom schemes called the Cantor's postulate. And this was highly controversial because it seemed to imply that infinity was not an abstract theoretical concept, but rather a concrete value that one could arrive at. And so mathematicians at the time used a set of collected restricted cases in order to limit the types of sets that would be recognized. And so that kind of resolved some of the controversy around the question. Now in 1904, Zermelo introduced the axiom of choice to support the, for every function f, there's an inverse function g, such that f of g of x is equal to x in the range of f. This was also partly controversial for the same reasons related to Cantor's theorem postulate. But so there were a couple of paradoxes that were introduced in this. So how this relates to one-way functions is if you have x, you're able to calculate f of x, and if y is in the range of f, it is hard to find x such that f of x is equal to y. So that gives us the basis of what we know as one-way functions. So it's going to be easy to compute and hard to invert. So to discuss some terminology here, by easy to compute, that means that there is a known algorithm that runs in polynomial time, and an algorithm is a set of rules that a computer uses to run a calculation or a problem-solving operation. So one such example of that is you have f of x is equal to x to the 4th power modulo 11. So is this hard or easy to get the output? If you plug 2 in, 2 to the 4th is equal to, so 2, 4, 8, 16, but it's modulo 11, so you keep the remainder, which is 5. Or you plug in 3 and you get 4 as the remainder there. Sorry, 3, 9, or no, you plug in 3 and then you plug in 4, and so if you start with the output, so if you start with 5, for instance, are you able to go back and look at the input or the rule that you used to figure out what the input was to begin with? And so those are that's the kind of questions that we will be asking today. Now there are 2 types of one-way functions. There are strong one-way functions, and so these are functions that are easy to compute and hard to invert, or by hard to invert, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is impossible, but there's an almost near negligible fraction of functions that you are able to invert these values over. And so I left the mathematical notation in just for the sake of visualizing what this looks like and just today will kind of be, it'll be more of a surface level conversation just because 15 minutes isn't really enough time to touch on the mathematical aspect of it. Now, the other sorts of functions are weak one-way functions, and in these functions, it's easy to compute, however, not nearly as hard to invert as strong one-way functions. And an example of this is integer factorization. And so all one-way functions are grouped into these two categories. Now, the million-dollar question, the controversy, starts when we talk about there are no functions that are currently proven to be one-way functions. There's no proof that one-way functions even exist at all. However, we do have a set of functions where math has not been able to definitively conclude whether or not there are solutions that you can give given the output to get back to the input that are both easily solvable. And this relates to P versus NP in the case that, so P classes are problems that can be solved very easily. NP problems are problems that the computer cannot solve, but it's easily checkable. Now, examples of this are, so P problems would be like multiplication. NP problems would be like Sudoku. To get the answer to the Sudoku, you have to try every iteration of the problem in order to get to that. So that's kind of how those problems scale in complexity. The existence of one-way functions, if proven true, would imply that P is not equal to NP. So that would mean that there are no fast ways to solve NP problems, no matter how hard we look. And this has a lot of implications for method authentication, identification, and a lot of the cryptography that we use today. And that's a question that actually, before I did this project, I did not realize just how close we were to being able to provide an answer to this question. So one of the applications that we have currently for one-way functions is hash functions. Hash functions transform input messages of various length into output sequences of a fixed length. And this works so hash values are often used to mark input sequences, which assigns them a unique value. And so it is easy to compute their values based on just having the input data. However, if you have the hash value, you're not really able to figure out what the input is, and so that's how they meet the criteria of being one-way functions. One-way functions are used to protect data against, one-way hash functions are used to protect data against international or intentional or unintentional modifications. Having some data, one can calculate a checksum that may be attached to the message and checked by other recipients by calculating the same checksum and comparing it to the received checksum value. And so they use this for hash message authentication codes. So in the picture here, you have iPad and OPAD, and those are modifiers for the secret key. Now, ideally, you would want to have them modify the secret key in two distinct ways such that the inputs are dissimilar. And so that guarantees that the hash message authentication code is as secure as possible. And we use that today in many systems like internet protocols, SSL, IPsec, and SSH. Now, another application of this is public key encryption and authentication. So you have two different keys, a public key, one for encryption, one for decryption. The encryption key is commonly referred to as the public key, and the decryption key is the private key. So if you're given an encryption key, it should be computationally infeasible to find the decryption key, and vice versa. So if you have Andrew who publishes his key publicly, and Beth looks for a copy of the key, Andrew encrypts Beth's messages with public key algorithm. Andrew would send Beth the ciphertext. Andrew would take the private key, decrypt the ciphertext, and read the message. And so this is a very, very simple way of how this works. It's far more complicated in practice, but this is just a very simple example. With authentication, it works a little differently in that if Lucy wants to send Michael a message and wants to prove that it's sent but doesn't want anybody to read it, Lucy would send the message using a private key to get the ciphertext. Lucy would send Michael both the message and the ciphertext. Michael would get the message and the ciphertext from someone claiming to be Lucy. So then Michael would get Lucy's public key from a trusted source. decrypt the ciphertext with Lucy's public key. And so that's one way of verifying that that the message is congruent, because it knows that the key has been authenticated and that the message is indeed from Lucy because it's congruent. So now the question of one-way functions is really fundamentally a question of computing power, because in the internet we really only use one type of one-way function predominantly, integer factorization. And there are logarithmic operators that we also use, but both of these are vulnerable to being solved by Shor's algorithm. And essentially, once quantum computing really takes off, it's going to be not very long before we figure out whether or not P and NP questions are the same sorts of questions, and whether or not so whether or not everything is currently safe and secret, so to speak. So one way of kind of getting around this, in the case that integer factorization is resolved by quantum computing, there are other kinds of one-way functions that we have, such as the errors key exchange or the supersingular isogeny Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And there are a handful of other one-way functions. We don't exactly know how they work as far as whether or not we can find a solution to these questions. And another way would be to actually fight quantum cryptography eavesdroppers with quantum computing. There's something called the BB84 protocol, which assigns a orientation to the qubits. So a conventional computer operates using bits. Quantum computing versus using qubits, so not zeros and ones, but you use zeros and ones and everything in between, and you're providing orientation such that if an eavesdropper drops in, they might be able to see the orientation, but they don't have the measured values that were provided for the qubits. Or if they try to guess the orientation of the qubits, they would have to guess that, so you and the server in this instance are comparing what you receive. So half the bits will scale to the qubits, and so, or half the qubits from you and the server will be compared, and so you're guessing the orientation based on the server. So the eavesdropper would have to guess the same exact way in order for you to not be able to detect that there is an eavesdropper present, and so that's how that operates. For the sake of not treading over my teammate who will be presenting next, I will neglect to kind of cover that more in detail, but suffice to say that I think quantum computing, more so than anything, will usher in an answer to the question of whether or not P versus NP is really the same question, whether or not one-way functions exist. It's only a matter of time. So there have been a couple of quantum networks that have already been set up, Shanghai, Beijing, Vienna, and they've already all successfully implemented the BB84 protocol, and a lot of them are experimenting now with something called E91, which instead of the server generating the qubits, you're both given a set and you compare orientations. Okay, so in conclusion, who's working on this? We have UC Berkeley, DARPA, many other colleges, organizations. With Moore's law, we're doubling processing speed nearly every 2 years. Quantum computing will resolve this question very, very soon, in the near future, most likely. And that's important for answering the question of P versus NP, fundamental use of cryptography, personal identification, authentication, other data security applications. So anybody that has any personal information on the internet is affected by one-way functions and the potential ramifications of this, whether or not one-way functions exist, and if P versus NP, in fact, whether or not those are the same kinds of questions. If one-way functions do not exist, then everything is vulnerable, and we will need to step up our game in terms of utilizing different methods or protocols in order to maintain our security of our information. If they do exist, then will still be a kind of a challenge to maintain as the field evolves. China and Russia are doing some very fascinating work in cryptography. So thank you very much for your time.
So,
as you said, I more focused on the general idea and concept of quantum computing. Like I kind of actually left out a lot of the mathematics behind it, as because at the time people I was presenting to, it would just I would have lost them. So the first thing I was wanted to cover on this is what questions we should be asking regarding quantum computers, and it's along the lines of like what's the difference between quantum and classic. What can we potentially achieve with quantum computing? What are risks posed by it? What can we do about those risks? And why are quantum computers important? Now, the assumptions, some of these I am actually guilty of initially approaching this topic, and they rely on that quantum computers are just like another trend that will probably not go anywhere, Another being that we would likely not see much come of this, and another assumption that I previously ran into was that quantum computers will replace classical computers, most of all of which are, false, but we will get to that later. Now, the point of view this is coming from is I am a student at University of North Carolina of Charlotte. I am working on my bachelor's in computer science, but I also I'm also working on 2 minors within math and physics, and I also plan to continue working on a PhD in physics later on after this. Now, the first initial thing I was wanting to cover before we got into like the meat and gravy of the topic was some initial definitions, and they cover stuff along the lines of just general stuff like mechanics, obviously being the study of motion of objects and related to concepts of force and energy. And the difference, and this kind of gets into the difference between what's the difference of classic and quantum computers. When I refer to classic, it refers to pre-20th century. We're talking Newtonian physics. This is dealing with the physics at the time were just approximations. However, we saw that of course, the issue being with these is that when it approaches extreme situations as approaching the speed near to light, or the inertial frame of reference near to the speeds of light, or dealing with infinitesimal sizes, that's where it starts to break down. And because of that, we get to modern physics and quantum mechanics, which, as you see, started to develop after that due to the works of Niels Bohr, Einstein, and basically everything post-20th century, mostly due to World War II and what that brought. Now, I'm going to cover very briefly just some of the historical behind it. There's a lot I'm going to have to end up skipping just due to time. But to start off, one of the most key concepts that come off was from 1980 that Paul Benoit, if I said his name right, an American physicist, had proposed an idea based on Alan Turing's Turing machine to have a computer which functioned on the quantum mechanical principles, which was referred to as the quantum Turing machine. In 1981, Richard Feynman published his paper, Simulating Physics with Computer, in which he proved that quantum systems found in physics cannot be showed on classical computers. Instead, you would need quantum computers. And this is often due to the probabilistic and exponential nature of the functions used in quantum mechanics, which just classical computer just simply cannot handle. Wait, I didn't mean to do that yet, my bad. Sorry. David Deutsch, if I said his name right, described the world's first universal quantum computer. In a published paper, he was able to show how a computer could reproduce any realizable physical system, and also show that it would perform much faster than a classical computer. But he was also the first to conceptually explain the mathematical concepts, which that's actually false because Richard Feynman actually did that. That's an error on my part. In the paper of simulating physics, he did explain a lot of the mathematical concepts behind it. Anyways. Move on to 1991 through 2000. We have Peter Shor, who develops Shor's algorithm, which is an efficient factorization algorithm of which can be used on a quantum computer efficiently. And now this became an issue as this was highlighted often for encryption that was used at the time. Like the public encryption is often used for multiplying large numbers together, and it relied on the fact that it would take like more time than the universe has even existed to be able to break some of this encryption, where if this algorithm was ran specifically on a quantum computer, where it'd be able to look at multiple values at once and break it all down, as such, it would be able to run something that would take like just a few minutes, if that. In 1995, Christopher Monroe and David Wineland of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or I think NIST, is that what it's referred to, they demonstrated the first quantum logic gate called the C0 gate. And in 1999, D-Wave formed, being the first ever company to sell computers which exploit the quantum effects of their operation. Now, D-Wave, they sometimes like to, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding D-Wave as for some of the computers they have built as far as what they would like to call quantum computers, but like I said, there's still a lot of controversy around that. But however, they were one of the big companies to kind of help lead the way to bring everybody else in. Now, in 2001, Shor's algorithm was actually successfully tested on this next page. Yeah, it was actually first demonstrated. A team of IBM at the Aladenika Research Center in California succeeded in factorizing the integer 15 into 5 and 3. They used a thimble of Bilspoke liquid containing billions of molecules. The molecules were constructed from 5 fluoride and 2 carbon atoms, each with their own nuclear spin state. The molecules worked as a 7-qubit quantum computer, which, when pulsed with electromagnetic waves, monitored using a nuclear magnetic resonance, if I said that right. And then I'm actually gonna skip past a lot of this D-Wave history, just for sake of time. Just know that they started doing a lot more. Now, I wrote on here that they started selling their like 512 qubits, but as I said, there's still a lot of controversy of whether they consist of. They did try and indeed prove that they did indeed have a quantum computer by displaying theirs versus a similar built modern day computer, and found out that it actually ended up running 3,600 times faster than the desktop computer, essentially proving that they did indeed have a quantum computer, but it's still up for debate. Now, when it comes to the present, a lot of things happened last year. First of all, D-Wave made a totally new computer. But in this case, IBM Q was created. Intel ended up developing their first 17-qubit chip for Q-Tech, if I said that right. Microsoft also then releases Q-Sharp, which is a quantum computing programming language, which I still have yet to actually look at, but I will get around to. And when it comes to 2018, well, the race continues to see who can develop the most efficient quantum computer. And yeah. Now, moving on from this, we're going to look at a little bit more of the science. Now, when it comes to the original Turing machine, it consisted of a tape of unlimited length and a header. What the header would do was essentially, conceptually, would go down and reach part of the tape which was marked a 1, a 0, or blank, and based on what value it read would determine on what function to do next. And that's basically the most conceptual way you could get any sort of modern classical computer basically in existence. This includes supercomputers as well. At the very fundamental level, this is basically how they function. Now, on a quantum Turing machine, on the other hand, this is based, this one has a tape that read and write and exists on like a more of a quantum state. This means that the tape could be, a 1, a 0, or both. Now, this is also analogous, or not only analogous, but this is also representative of their, the bits of which they use for a quantum computer, which is also referred to as a qubit, which of course can be broken down to a 1, a 0, or a superposition of the both a 1 and a 0. Which in this case, like a superposition is a weighted sum of the difference of 2, and you can kind of visualize this by, like, if you go to the ocean, you see like 2 waves kind of go into each other and kind of grow to one big wave. It's a superposition of the 2 waves, and you can easily visualize this by using in multiple different ways, not just with matter, but with light, sound. In fact, if you ever ran the single slit or double slit experiment, it's a prime example of what you see right there. Now, one of the issues, like I said, one of the issues being caused by quantum computers is dealing with Shor's algorithm, of which can break down encryption, public data encryption. Now, one of the things that you can see over here, hold on, I think I'm tripping over my own 2 feet here. Sorry. Let me dial it back a sec. All right, sorry about that. Now, like I said, I already covered a qubit, but when you observe 1 of 2 entangled qubits, it causes it to behave randomly. And this is something I just wanted to clear up. But this tells the observer exactly how the other qubit acts if observed in a similar manner, if that makes sense. But of course, qubits cannot be used for communication, because looking at only one set of like qubits, it would seem like it'd be like a randomized pattern, whereas you have to look at the whole thing as one to see how all functions all together. And like I said, this is some parts that's kind of still throws me off. It's just, yeah. But however, there is one note to make here, is that n qubits, like x amount of qubits, can exist in a superposition of 2 to the n of all of its states at once, which is, this is how it's able to perform like an exponential amount of more functions than what classical computers can. Now, the issue, this is what I was about to cover on the previous slide, which that was just an error of images. The issue comes, like I said, with Shor's algorithm. But however, there's a potential solution that can come of this, is using photon particles to derive a key. And what you can do is you have like a polarization filter. You can have like a sender essentially use the spin of the particles to like encode data into 1s and 0s, and then send that data off to the receiver, which they have their polarization filters kind of set, and then they interact with each other to see which one's is correct and which one's not. And of course, the one key things here is those using that style is if someone were to try and eavesdrop on it, they, for one, trying to listen in, they wouldn't necessarily know what's going on too well. But however, if they try and perceive the photon particles of which were being sent, they could accidentally, since they didn't have their polarization filters set, accidentally change the system altogether, which would then be recognized on the receiver side, which then would be communicated to the senders, and then they'd have to start all over. Now, I think I covered a little bit of this, but when it comes to quantum versus classical, quantum computers will never, I'd say would never actually replace classical computers, at least anywhere in the near-time future. This is because when it comes to classical computers, they are really powerful on their own. And when it comes to quantum computers, it's still in its infancy. But there are specific functions of which quantum computers can run exponentially faster, as we've covered, than classical computers, such as data analyzation or prime factorization. However, other functions such like multiplication will be ran at relatively the same speed. Now, quantum computers today are still use classical computers to check for errors, as you know, like I said, it's still prone to infancy, or it's prone to error because it's still in its infancy, but it's a step in the right direction. Now, one of the other big key issues is that classical computers are a whole lot easier to build than quantum computers. A lot of times with a lot of quantum computers which we had today, a lot of their components need to be kept to near 0 degrees Kelvin in order to keep them, in order to have the states in a superposition in which we can perform those calculations. What we might likely see happen one day, though, is later on, is we might see them both exist as one system. We might have like quantum components, since they're able to cover their own calculations function, and we might see like a hybrid of the two computers put as one. And that's hypothetically, but you know. Now, there's a quick thing to deal with the. Okay, basically on this, quantum computers on their own are just dependent on the ethicality, is just dependent on who uses them, basically. How to benefit the themes. It will benefit science as it will be able to perform specific calculations which our modern computers can't. It will also explore new scientific areas and new forms of technology, and it will benefit modern civilization. And the conclusion is that we are not quite sure what will come out of quantum computers, as the developers of classical computers at the earliest time didn't quite understand how this would develop what we have now. So it's kind of going to be an exciting time in the future to see where this will lead us. And we'll just take it one step at a time. And the significance of conclusions, because it directly affects our near future. And yeah, thank you for your time. These are my sources. Thank you.